Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. This is your host, Ray Collazo. Thank you so much for joining us. And as we wrap up this week, the only thing real are the leaks. Thank you for joining us. You can check out all of our content here at Ray's Talk Show at rayspodcast.com. And, of course, you podcast listeners, we really appreciate all of you. You can catch us on your preferred podcast player, iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Play, so on and so forth. Thank you again so much. Overcast. There's someone that listens now on Overcast. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And on the line to help me make sense of this another crazy week. Another crazy week is my compadre, political strategist and activist, Elbert Garcia. LB. It's been a long week, huh? Been a long week, huh, brother?
It's been a long week, and we haven't even hit Friday yet. So we still have a good,
hit Friday. It is a 3-day weekend, unless, of course, we get deported to Central America before Monday. Happy
you never know what this
early President's Day for you, my friend. So on this edition of the show, if unless there's some other tweet or headline, but it's a packed week. We're going to talk later in the show about some of the work that Elbert Garcia is doing, holding Mayor Carlos Gimenez accountable for his shameful support of one of President Trump's most punitive executive actions related to punishing sanctuary cities for not cooperating with ICE and not giving themselves more to do with no money and not making our community any safer. So he's on the front lines of that issue. In South Florida, we'll get an update later. Ironically, in the midst of all the nonsense, President Trump did potentially, arguably the first nod in any positive light to the Latino community, one of his cabinet selections today. We'll talk about that. Of course, the Trump presser, madness. Someone asked LB if he can hook me up with meetings. Obviously, he must be able to hook me up with a meeting with Oscar De La Renta or A-Rod or Zoe Saldana because all Dominicans know each other, presumably. That's probably not far from the truth. I'm sure LB could hook those things up. But he just got like that.
Probably a couple of degrees. Everybody, everyone's a couple of degrees of separation, I'm sure.
I know you. Anyway, I don't blow you up, but you definitely know celebrities. The boy we got to keep an eye on is my man Stephen Miller. We need to talk about him. We cannot forget about that guy. But let's start about sort of the weekend immigration news in our community, Albert. So, beginning over the weekend, there were reports all over the country, including in your community in Florida, about raids and hundreds, if not thousands, of people that were taken into custody and eventually deported. Guadalupe Garcia was probably the most celebrated case. A woman that was just living her life in Phoenix before she tragically was taken away from her family for simply doing what ICE asked her to do, which was sort of check in on a yearly basis. The Daniel Ramirez Medina case, this is now a young man who's a DACA recipient. So he's here because that executive action has not been rescinded. He is here legally in the country, but he has been withheld, and that's a very sad case. And we'll talk a little bit about sort of the fallout in which our members of our Congressional Hispanic Caucus, people that are elected to service on a federal level, are their rights are being denied. Very sad stuff. But let's get to the immigration stuff. So, Albert, I was thinking about you because we've had so many of these conversations. This Daniel Ramirez Medina case. So he lives in the Pacific Northwest in the Seattle area. He was detained. It still is detained. He is subsequently now sued ICE for detaining him because, again, he is a DACA recipient. He is here legally in the country, and he is being held under quote unquote suspicion of gang affiliation and supposed affiliation. So explain to people what has happened here, Albert, and what are the grounds? Because I almost think about Trayvon Martin,
that's the crazy thing. The crazy thing is that, they're according to ICE, they're basically saying that he admitted to having some sort of, to basically being a gang member, and he's a threat. He's a national security threat. He's a threat to the safety and security of his community and the nation. They point out to some tattoos that they say are are evidence of gang affiliation. And then they say that he admitted it, right? But kind of that he admitted it weirdly, right? Because when you look at the quote that they even gave, they said that he knows that some of his friends, are gang members, that he knew some of his friends were being kind of gang members there. And so it's a, and he's got an attorney who basically denies that he has said that. But I'm kind of taken aback, Ray, because even if he just did say that, right? Even if he said that, oh, he had a couple of friends who perhaps had, been on the other side of the law, doesn't mean that he's one. Doesn't mean, and almost like guilt by association, he has a tattoo in which they're defining it as a gang tattoo, right? Again, they're the only ones that's saying that, because everybody else is talking about him being, a good member of the community, an upstanding member of the community. But this is the level in which the Trump administration has gone, right? They are going to trying to find reasons, right, to deport people, right? I mean, they admit. I mean, you talked about this meeting with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus that first of all, there used to be a time when agency officials would meet with caucuses and any congressional members, whoever asked a question. I mean, I thought that was congressional privilege in terms of being able to ask a federal agency, on behalf of their constituents, right?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a second. Yeah.
But it's interesting because, again, I mean, what ICE has admitted in a variety of different meetings, that they really truly believe, in terms of interpreting this executive order by the president, that every single one of those 11 million undocumented in the country could be removed at any time, right? Because they basically, because the executive order in essence reclassified what is a criminal alien, right? And again, it's one of these things where it's scary because in essence they've moved the line, right? They've moved the line, similar to 1996 when you had these draconian element of put into that immigration law that basically said, look, if you committed a crime even 20 or 30 years ago, you can now be deportable for that, for something that you did in the way past. Again, it's kind of a similar kind of thing. They've redefined what a criminal alien is. And so you have now people talking about, well, again, we've got to maintain law and order. And yet it's a lot easier to make that net wider when you expand the definition, of a criminal to now include somebody who, hell, maybe just be driving without a license. I mean, when was driving a license, a criminal offense? And, like in terms of not hit anybody, just a mere act of driving without a license. And yet this is the means in which they will go to justify the expulsion of almost 11 million undocumented.
And what's so infuriating about this particular case with DACA recipient Daniel Ramirez Medina is that, so, everything you said, right? So it's like, oh, he has gang affiliations. Well, what does that even mean? He has Latino friends, and then this, pointing to or insinuating even that a tattoo would be evidence. And in fact, the tattoo that he has that they're referring to is a La Paz tattoo. Of course, that's in Spanish, peace, not exactly a great name for a gang, but
right, and it's also a place where his family's from too.
Yeah, it's just like exactly. That's what I was ready to say. That it's just a town that his family's from in Mexico. So it's like you having a Washington Heights tattoo that doesn't make you a gangbanger, and it's like everything you said. It's like, and I keep thinking about Trayvon Martin because it's like, the threshold. I mean, if just think about, especially the younger generation in this country, if having a tattoo implicated you as a criminal, well, we wouldn't have young people to do anything because they'd all be in jail. So, what is the and
that's not just folks of color either, that's the thing. Like, it's not even
absolutely not. So it's like, as I said on last week's episode, if you want to criminalize anybody, you can criminalize anybody for anything, whether it's pot smoking, being late on a traffic ticket. In the case of this young man, being a Latino that has friends and has a tattoos. And so you're listening to Elbert Garcia and Ray Collazo on Race Talk. So I'm already livid because of this situation, because of the terror that this administration has wrought on our community. And I go back, and we're going to get into the Congressional Hispanic Caucus element of this. But the thing I go back to when you think about this concept of safety, and this is being done supposedly not to punish Latinos or not to reestablish some sort of white dominant society, but because they keep us safe. And I think about this young man like Daniel Ramirez Medina, a DACA recipient, by all accounts, just a working member of society, a student, a man with a good reputation. I think about Guadalupe Garcia, this woman in Phoenix, Arizona, what a tragedy. That woman's been taken away from her family. And I think about this being done supposedly for safety. And then I think about, LB, the fact that probably less than 200 miles away from where I'm sitting right now, on the east coast of this country, about 50 miles, not even 50 miles from the northeast, the Atlantic Ocean, 100 miles away or so is some Russian spy submarine. God knows what it's packing, right? And they're even worried about ignoring, deflecting that safety issue, that issue in general, but that safety issue. I would submit to anyone listening to this, regardless of your political ideology, regardless of what you feel about immigration in this country, who's more a danger to our country right now? A bunch of Latinos in the southwest part of this country, 99.9% of which are just trying to live their lives and work and contribute to this country. And believe me, they give a lot more than they get back. Believe me.
Well,
that Russian spy submarine that's sitting 100 miles from my house. And by the way, sitting 100 miles from New York City, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., major metropolitan areas in this country.
Well, you can see the difference, Ray, when it comes to safety and security in terms of law enforcement. You can see the difference in terms of what people have to say when you listen to police chiefs versus sheriffs, right? And so some people who don't know, like, well, what's the big difference, right? Like, aren't they in terms of law enforcement, right? But most sheriffs, correct me if I'm wrong, are elected officials, right? They have to run a campaign like any other person, right? Listen to a police chief, and police chiefs don't, right? Police chiefs are usually
civil servants. They get picked by the mayor. Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. And so they are done in terms of, and it allows in some ways a police chief. It provides a certain kind of buffer and flexibility against politics, right? And you look at, and the International Association of Police Chiefs has said it. They've come out against that executive order, basically saying that it only makes us, more dangerous, right? And that local law enforcement shouldn't be kind of connected to that, right? And then you get someone like Sheriff Clark in Milwaukee, right? Who basically, even if he believes to his core what he is saying, he's also stoking a certain amount of fear that's also moving the electorate. Much
respect to our Latino and immigrant rights leaders in Milwaukee, holding it down this week out there with massive protests. And you're absolutely right. That Sheriff Clark is a great enemy of our community. The other part of this is that, so for people that missed it, so the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, 43 strong, largest caucus we've had in the history of Congress. They represent probably about over 30 million Americans in this country. They requested a meeting with ICE Director Tom Homan. He's not our homie, that's for sure, Tom Homan. Sounds like a guy that was a backup catcher for the Mets at one point. Tom Homan. Or the Mariners, like when David Valley was hurt, he would come up from Tacoma. So Tom Homan had set a meeting. I was actually with some of those members before they were supposed to step into that meeting in Washington, D.C. this week. And then in la última hora, he canceled the meeting like a coward, said, I'm going to wait. We're going to wait until we have a bipartisan delegation. Subsequently today, Paul Ryan convened a meeting of members of Congress. Congressman Gutierrez and other CHC members were denied to get into the meeting, where basically he laid out what you just said earlier, which is ICE and Homeland Security is interpreting this executive order as basically everyone's a suspect, everyone's a criminal, everyone is subject to deportation as a priority. I just can't, despite the fact that champions like Congresswoman Michelle Lujan Grisham, one of the few Hispanic representatives that were allowed to go in there and basically came out of that meeting saying, we're all a target here. I want people to understand how unprecedented this is, that members of Congress, not undocumented people, not objectively poor people, not felons, not homeless, members of Congress are being denied due process, are being denied standard modes of communication, interacting with federal agencies, and are being discriminated against right in front of our eyes.
First of all, it's funny, right? Because it's like, It's like what, you're not supposed to have more than two Latinos in a room or something, or three, like that we've suddenly become,
Two's a token,
Republicans and
two's a token, three's a voting block.
well,
You know,
and this is supposed to be the party that's against quotas, right? But suddenly now you can only have a certain amount of Latinos in the room, right? Because maybe you can do that. I mean, he's not talking about. It's not just about denial of congressional privilege, right? It's denial to a conversation, right? I mean, think about this, right? Like you won't get into a conversation because you don't want to answer questions about data and about other stuff, right? I mean, think about that's to the point that we've gotten to, right? We got to the point where people will do that, and yet again, I think it's emboldened. This president has emboldened a certain kind of, yes, we are living in a lack of civility, and one could argue that both sides of the political aisle are responsible for that, and yet, he's taken it, and his administration has taken it to another level, right? And unfortunately, what's going on is that people are starting to look at that, and people are considering that as the norm, as the way things should do, and what a certain kind of nastiness that we used to see only in political campaigns, but is now being justified to run government, and civil service in a hyper-partisan way, right? Because at the end of the day, look, you've got your rules, you got your marching orders. Well, you know what? If that's your marching orders, you need to tell every member of Congress. Every member of Congress has a right to do that,
especially the members whose communities are going to be disproportionately impacted.
No, but it's even worse. Like ICE has gotten to this level where it's like they'll say like, "Oh, we don't do raids, we do operations." Like, and even suggested last week, even released a press release last week that kind of suggested that members of the public who spread the information about operations going on are somehow unpatriotic, and in fact somehow even like spreading dangerous rumors. I mean, when is the last time you've heard even law enforcement even say something like that, right? But again, it's trying to kind of take away people's right to hold them accountable, right? Which again, in many ways, like technology allows people to do, and yet they want to kind of be above that, and it's a scary thing about that,
No, and
I'm not sure what is that.
And it just again, for those, I just go back to like this "I told you so" thing, but like our network of people and arguably the majority of the country at this point, this isn't just about like Democrat or liberals being upset about a Republican being in the White House. This isn't about a crazy guy or a wacky guy. This is a guy that not only is fundamentally setting back, the civil rights for this country, arguably the majority of Americans, if you especially include women and the Gorsuch nomination and all these other things, but a pure threat to our democracy, the autocratic, and when I was a kid, I remember how Latin America would get put down by American society. They would talk about, remember those days when we were little kids, banana republics,
Mm-hmm.
and look what they do in South America. They would ridicule our countries, even though they destabilized them, and that's partially how those things went down, about this sort of behavior. And now we're replicating it here, and it's very scary. And you're listening to, and we have to support our Congressional Hispanic Caucus members. They don't get a lot of media attention in the mainstream, but they are doing. I was in D.C. this week. Let me tell you, they're doing everything they can. I mean, they're literally having a protest outside of meetings that they should be in as members of Congress, and they have to be disrespected like that, and they're holding it down for us. So much respect, particularly for Congresswoman Michelle Lujan Grisham, who has really been a very progressive champion in this session over the last few weeks as a woman that's been a strong advocate and strong voice in the situation. Of course, like the guys always holding it down, like Congressman Gutierrez. I wanted to get to Stephen Miller. In this
before we get to Miller, I just want to say that at least the administration knows who the CHC is, right? Because shoot, Trump today didn't even know what the hell the Congressional Black Caucus was.
Well, let's since you brought it up, let's get to it. So in response to a very prominent journalist, April Ryan's question her question to President Trump today, that would he engage the Congressional Black Caucus in his obsession with dealing with inner city issues and particularly crime in cities like Chicago, his response was, "Do you want to set up the meeting for me? Are they friends of yours?" So Elbert, I mean, when you hear something like that, especially as someone with a journalism background, like you said, so like yourself, someone that's engaged in these conversations with journalists of color around the country. I mean, I'm curious about just what your reaction was today.
Well, I just was like, first of all, like, it's a sign of disrespect, right? I mean, Donald Trump is from New York. Donald Trump, I can tell you, had plenty of meetings with, African American members of Congress, including, the Venerable Charlie Rangel a number of times. He's not going to tell me that he don't know what the CBC is, right? So this was just plain, it's Bishop, right? It's Bishop. I tell you, man. Like, it's just, and it's used to demean and deauthorize, right? And just kind of to embarrass.
That's right.
Right? So again, these are congressional members, right? These are folks that people have elected into that. Same people that you could argue, rightly or wrongly, right? Maybe not by the popular vote, but at least by your elections, have actually elected you. And so it's like, so if he feels the sting of people disrespecting him, well, shoot, what are you supposed to do? Like, do this and just pass along that disrespect? Right? Is this the place that he's leading? Right? I mean, this is, again, this is a man who doesn't apologize for anything, right? And we know this, right? I mean, we know this is going to be, between, unless he gets impeached, this is be someone that we're going to have to live in the body politics for the next 4 years. And yet it's, again, it's a way of, it's a way of gaslight. It's another form of gaslighting, right? It's another form of almost saying like, I'm going to take what is the norm and I'm going to disrupt it. And unless you could come back with the power to actually make me hurt, right, then I'm just going to continue to do it. And what is sad in some ways is that it, first of all, takes us into this like slippery slope of having to like, to go tit for tat when it comes to kind of power struggles and exercising power. And so that's, certainly, in terms of a road that there are very few winners on when you come to deal with it, right? But it also kind of takes people away from the actual, what government is supposed to be about, right? And government is not an, although there are politics, governance is not an exercise in politics. That's what you run campaigns for, right? I mean, that's what you run campaigns for. And if people like running campaigns and campaigning all the time, and that's why like they work in those areas. But that's not what governance is about. Governance is not about constant conflict, right? Governance is about learning about things and actually like putting good policy to work that actually works. And regardless of whether or not you're on the left or the right, the truth is that to govern means to actually be responsible. And the fact of the matter is that this man isn't. Right? He's not responsible. He's not responsible for his words. He's certainly, unfortunately, now, in a position where he's basically can give, people permission to not do that as well.
No, and it's government is government certainly is not supposed governing and government is not supposed to be a tool for disrespect and pretty overt discrimination. For people that don't follow this stuff, the level even before and of course moments after Trump makes this asinine statement, the CBC tweets out the letter that they sent him at the beginning of the year requesting a meeting. The fact, it's not even worth mentioning. Well, he doesn't know them. Come on, they're in Congress. And so I want people to understand from my, quasi insider perspective is that the level of disrespect, the level of lack of access, lack of communication that not just members of Congress that are, in the CBC and the CHC, but mainstream, nationally recognized Black and Latino leaders have no communication, no relationship, no access with this administration typically, and this has probably been the case for the last 40 years. 40 plus years.
And you can't,
if I can finish this, LB, is that any new administration, regardless of Republicans, Democrats, they, well before they get inaugurated during the transition period, they have meetings with Latino leaders. They have meetings with the CBC. They have meetings with the CHC. They have meetings with, constituent groups throughout the political spectrum, women's groups. Everyone gets to meet with these people before to discuss their agendas, to discuss potential areas of commonality, to discuss the areas they know they're going to disagree with, and have a rule of discuss rules of engagement, discuss how we're gonna treat each other. This guy's totally broken all those rules. I mean, the lack of respect. There was and people. It was reported, but I want people to remind them There was a meeting. None of those meetings in the Latino space have not taken place. I mean, literally, and amongst African Americans, what you've seen on TV with him talking to Ray Lewis and Kanye has been the extent of his, and hiring our friend here, Omarosa, has been the extent of his black outreach. I mean, literally, the meeting with quote unquote the Latino meeting that was called by, it was actually the RNC, that the mainstream Latino organizations were invited to attend. Literally, the representative for the White House was a cast member from a Latino who had been a cast member on The Apprentice. So, I mean, so for people that say, like Senator Rubio goes on TV the other day, talking about, oh, we need decorum, we need civility. Again, a vacuum, that's a nice statement. And in a vacuum, I agree with that. First of all, pretty awful messenger, someone that's co-signing on this nonsense. But second of all, it ain't Democrats, it ain't Republicans to some degree. It's about this man and what this administration has wrought. And when you don't have that basic level of respect, that basic baseline level of political discourse, pardon me if I'm not going to if I'm going to co-sign on speaking the statement of Senator Rubio, when that's very hollow, and this administration has shown no signs of respecting any level of our community, from the undocumented to our members of Congress.
Yeah, no, and the thing is, unlike before, where at a certain point in time you could sometimes blame ignorance or perhaps lack of personal experience or anything like that. The truth of the matter is that increasingly it's seen as a deliberate thing, right? And it goes to our main man, not Andre, not Reggie, but Stephen Miller, who had this tirade, against, who just, who was on the talk shows, on the Sunday talk shows last week and last Sunday, who basically is the poster boy, right, of this deliberate attempt by the Trump administration to basically erase or attempt to erase, the general Latino influx, right? From from a person who, when you look in terms of his own personal history, is very clear about not wanting, first of all, not certainly respecting the work of Latinos, across the nation and in his very own town in terms of in California, but really being very deliberate and aggressive about saying we need to get rid of them, and not just the undocumented, but lowering legal immigration, right? Positioning immigration as if immigration, and the allowing of people into our country was solely based on economics,
arresting, detaining, right? And deporting legal immigrants in the case of DACA recipients. It's already happening.
Right. But it's already happening. But even talking about, but even he went a step further, right? He went a step further to be able to say, like, no, we need to lower the regular rates of immigration, and we used to basically stop this family reunification, as if Latino citizens, Latino people, even if you want to get rid of in terms of first generation, like, immigrant Latino citizens like you and I, as if we don't have the right to bring our families, or to bring, to reunite with our families of other countries here in the United States, right? And again, they talk about, servicing America and for American workers, but who's America, right? Because if I'm starting my business and I've got a child and I want to bring my mother, from another country so she can help take care of my child, well, I have that right as an American citizen. Naturalized or born, that is my right as an American. So whose America are you actually safeguarding, right? I mean, I think that's the real issue. The real issue is you can't just protect a certain few of folks, right? No, you're supposed to, the laws are written for everybody to follow, and the protections are made for everyone to follow, and the benefits are supposed to be for everybody,
this is
not for a secret.
That's absolutely right. And the thing that, so for people who didn't see it, so Stephen Miller is basically Steve Bannon's young boy in the White House. He's a senior policy analyst,
policy advisor.
He's writing these executive orders with Bannon. He used to work for Senator Sessions in his office. I mean, he's 31 years old. This young boy grew up in Santa Monica, California. Somehow got in his brain in high school that this racist, extreme conservative, nationalistic ideology You know, there's all kind of reports literally telling high school friends I can't hang out with you anymore because you're Latino. You know, high school, in college and graduate essays, you know, basically spewing a pretty honest, you know, straight, you know, ethnocentric agenda, particularly targeted at the Latino community, regardless of our citizenship status. And he, you know, talks about voter fraud, which is basically targeted to us, our community, and this autocratic, dictatorial message that he believes President Trump's entitled to. He obviously has not read the Constitution lately. And so the reason I want to bring him up, and you can Google him, and you can, first of all, I know there's a lot to focus on, but we cannot ever forget that, you know, when people say that, again, we're exaggerating, you know, you liberals are sore losers, you know, these are the people that are in the White House right now. And so I want people to understand that how serious the threat is. And I do want to call out for people that are listening to this that, again, you know, maybe, you know, because there has been a particularly during the transition period where people that voted for Trump around because of economic issues and economic insecurity, there was a lot of talk. You saw the town halls that were on MSNBC, and you know, a lot of media scurried to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania to talk to, you know, working class white people, and their thing was, well, you know, we're not racist, and you know, we don't really want him to do that punitive stuff and be racial. You know, we just, you know, he's just talking, and we wouldn't want him to do that. And so my question to those people, and LB, I ask you, when are they going to speak up? Because remember when they were saying that wasn't really what they were in this for? And I'm not hearing any.
But you know why you're not hearing anything? You know why you're not hearing anything? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, those folks that you're referring to are willing to cede their conscience on those issues if they could get a job. If they could get a job, or if, you know, their son or daughter who's suffering from an opioid addiction could get some help. They were so desperate to receive that stuff there, and they're still waiting. They're still holding out hope, right? And again, you even you hear Stephen Miller's discussions saying about, oh, like we need to make sure that we get jobs for those hardworking Americans. And they're listening. They're keeping their ears open. They're saying, this stuff bothers me, but I'm still waiting for this. I'm still waiting for that opportunity there. And the problem is they're going to always keep waiting. Because this, at the end of the day, at the end of the day, all this is just smoke and mirrors. All this is smoke and mirrors because if you repeal Obamacare, it's going to have effects on the deficit, right? But you repeal it in a way so that way those tax benefits or those taxes that the upper echelon have to pay, they don't have to pay it anymore, right? And so it's one of these things where it's like, and he's done this before. Trump has done this before, in that he's put glitz and glamour on what he thinks is a project or an investment, and then after a couple of years he just breaks out, and who's left to holding the bag, right? Who's left? Those investors initially. Well, it's going to be the American people, right? And it's going to be your classic Latin American stuff where like people are in there and it's like they get theirs and then they get out, right? And where they're going to be the ones holding the problem, right? And that and God bless, there's a lot of people who are saying, no, we got to stand up to this now. And there are a lot of people, and we see you can't get it all through us, right? You can't get it all through. The Labor Secretary stepped down. Flynn resigned and stepped down.
ACA they crickets on ACA right now. So there's definitely we're definitely making our voice heard. There's no doubt that we're moving.
We're making our voice heard, and I think people are starting to realize that. Wait a minute, some people, and that even may give what you might say even moderate Republicans some voice or some legs in terms of as they try to push in. You look at the nomination or the name of Alexander Acosta for the Labor Secretary, and that's gotta have been that has the fingerprints of certainly of moderate Republicans, or at least some Republicans trying to throw a bone, whether triangulation or something, to Latinos, maybe to get some folks who are not as interested in immigration kind of pointing out to say, well, at least you nominated Latino, right? And so and Acosta comes,
a relatively moderate Latino, relatively moderate conservative,
Well, I'm very my conservative, but again, still, still something to, he's certainly not the perfect choice. Certainly, he certainly is qualified, right? Or is he at
Absolutely,
least
yeah. Yeah, this
credentialed?
ain't Ben
I mean,
Carson.
at the very least,
Yeah, no,
he's
he's definitely qualified. Yeah.
right. I mean, this at least he's been on the National Labor Relations Board. People might have not, agreed with what he has said on that, but at least he at least knows what the board is, right? At least its purpose of the board, right? At least he has that. I mean, there's some issues in terms of his, his participation in the early years of the Civil Rights Division of the, the George W. Bush administration, and those issues will come out.
Right.
I think, in terms of in terms of his hearings, and we'll see whether or not he's he's eligible. And I'm curious to see in terms of him, in terms of answering the question of like, how does he feel? How does he feel as a Latino, in terms of seeing the way this administration has treated other folks. And I'm not holding out hope that he's gonna say that that's bad or anything like that. I mean, well, he's his own person, and we'll wait and see. But at least to be able to have that opportunity to ask somebody that, it means that even people's indirect actions and people's indirect protests at least has some effect, right? Has some effect in terms of that way there.
What's
So
interesting? What's interesting about Alexander Acosta, who again was named by, it was actually the initial purpose of Trump's press conference today. So how ironic that in the one moment that he actually did something reasonable and showed some acknowledgement to the Latino community, he made a quick reference to that and then went on a tirade for 70 minutes about his nonsense. But the interesting thing about Alexander Acosta is that he's the dean, or he's got a very strong resume, but currently he's the dean of Florida International Law School, University Law School. Much respect to our I think they're Panthers, right? FIU. But anyway, FIU. A lot of good friends that are alums of that university. But that not only do they have, I mean, they're a Haku serving institution. They're a very large, probably majority Latino student body.
A lot of Latinos out there, a lot of Muslim students too as well, like a lot of
immigrants, presumably a lot of DACA students. So hopefully he gets questioned on those elements of this administration's agenda, and hopefully he can at least keep one eye on what Sessions is doing down the hall. And you're listening to Ray Collazo and Elbert Garcia on Ray's Talk Show. We're very happy people, and loving and love everybody, and normally like to just tease each other about baseball and life, but if you hear concern in our voice and you hear a little anger, it's because there's people, maybe not today, me or Elby, thank God, in our families, but there's people out there feeling pain and of feeling. I mean, there was a woman that got detained after walking out of a court case as in a domestic violence case. So she's trying to protect herself, and our country turns around and detains her at the end of the case. So as a victim. So this is why we're hyped up here. This is real life.
No, and this is the thing that again, I was talking to someone today, because down in Miami there are a bunch of activists holding out a fast, holding a fast since Monday, in that just to shine attention and light on what's going on nationally, but also locally here in Miami, as our county commission is set to examine a recent directive from the mayor here, who in essence kind of gutted what many thought was kind of a sanctuary cities policy, or a sanctuary cities light policy. And in talking with this person, I think we came to an agreement in that look, you may be angry about the amount of undocumented people here, or people who you think shouldn't be here, right? But until you change the law, until you change what the Constitution says and what the law says about what people have rights, people have protections. And until you change that, and granted there are a lot of people who are trying to change that, but until the moment you change that, you cannot deny people that. You cannot deny things like due process. You cannot change around and make people guilty before they're innocent. Like, you just cannot do that. You cannot do that for one segment of the population. You can't certainly do that, for the entire segment of the population. And so we have got to it's very easy to kind of, turn your head and say, well, that doesn't affect me because I'm not that kind of person, right? And even for a lot of Latinos and Latinos who may have made it and stuff, they're like, well, I'm not, undocumented. I've been here. Not even my parents. I've been here for generations. That doesn't affect me. Well, you know what? The truth of the matter is that when you walk through the door, people will still look at you as that person, right? Even for like your own practical self survival, right? People look at you that way. But even for like a larger, higher moral thing, what like ultimately we are actually have a great opportunity at this point to actually define, what kind of country we're gonna be, what kind of locality we're gonna be. And people who used to complain or are fond of complaining about not having power and always complaining don't realize that actually this is that time to do so. And if you're not stepping up, then you're really allowing something else to happen, right? That ultimately will come back and hurt you, right? Whether it's because the irony of ironies would be that in 4 or 5 years, Stephen Miller goes across to some other country and falls in love with an immigrant and can't get her in, right? I mean, that would be the irony of all ironies, right? But I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen when I used to work in some of the immigration cases where people would come in and be like, how come how come it's so difficult for me as a citizen to do X or do Y or do Z? And I was like, you're complaining where so many people have, you're now coming into consciousness, when so many people have known this before for so many
Albert,
other years.
give people an
we're living
update
in.
again. Mayor Carlos Gimenez from Miami was one of the, I think, the only major city mayor who quickly announced he would comply with the executive order related to sanctuary cities. Give people an update on our friends. People heard our friend Tomas Kennedy on the show a few weeks ago discussing this issue, but give people an update what's happening, and in particular our brave folks that are putting literally their lives on the line for this issue in front of in public. Well, you can explain what's happening down there.
Yeah, well, look, what's going on is, as you mentioned, Ray, the county mayor, and again, this is not to be confused with the Miami City mayor, which is whose name is Tomás Regalado. This is Miami-Dade County Mayor Carlos Gimenez, who until last election cycle was actually a very good friend of Donald Trump. Had visited him in Mar-a-Lago a number of different times. His son is actually, at some point, I'm not sure if he's still hired, but at some point was a lobbyist for the Trump organization. So clearly this man knows, knows Donald Trump, knows in terms of what kind of person, how he makes his decision. And so when he saw that Donald Trump was signed this executive order threatening to take away the federal funding of cities whom they would define as sanctuary cities, because no one really knows what a sanctuary city is, right? But that it left that definition in the hands and the eyes of the federal government. He decided that he would overrule what was county policy. Because in 2013, basically what the county decided was that ICE would sometimes have these orders, these detainer orders, which they basically asked local law enforcement if local law enforcement to keep in jail certain folks who they were still looking for, and to keep them for an indeterminate amount of time while they basically got there. And to avoid kind of the moral question whether or not this was right, the county decided to basically say, well, unless you pay for that extra jail time, we're not gonna do you any favors, and we're just gonna let that person, if that person's supposed to go on bond, then they're gonna go on bond. If that person is convicted, then they'll serve their time and then get out. Like, we're not gonna do you any extra favors. If you come in and by chance that person is still in jail, then so accordingly we'll transfer you to him. Right? And so that was a 2013 policy. Not perfect, because in Broward County, just up north, the county folks up there had actually taken it one step further and said, well, you actually have to have a judge's order, right? With the idea being that at least some sort of level of due process would have happened, right? Miami-Dade didn't go that far, but at least provided some sort of level of protection. Gimenez basically said, look, you know what? We don't care about the money, because the money that we would lose in federal funding is way more than the money they would charge. Right? And whether or not that's true or not, especially because, over the last couple of years, the feds have not actually attempted to get any people. And so that amount of money is certainly, not a real true number, a true estimate in number in terms of how much the county would actually save or cost. He decided that he would do that, that he would, basically listen to Donald Trump, except, this is a city of immigrants. This is a heritage of immigrants. And so, there was a lot of complaints among people, and the county commission ultimately has the power, to approve of any changes that the mayor makes in terms of policy. And so they set up a special hearing for people to discuss that issue. That hearing is tomorrow. And there are no number of different resolutions and potentials that might go out. Some commissioners have introduced resolutions supporting Mayor Gimenez's point. Others have gone the other way and said, or at least added some more kind of legal protections, so that because the real fear at the end of the day, Ray, is that both Mayor Gimenez and a bunch of people around the country, even a couple commissioners, want to say, well, we're only targeting the quote unquote criminals. We're only targeting the violent criminals, right? And you guys didn't make a complaint when Obama was doing that. And you shouldn't really make a complaint now, right? And in many ways, that's an apples and oranges conversation, because first of all, Obama was only targeting most violent criminals, right, for the most part. And second of all, there was a lot of complaints. Certainly a lot of complaints from on a national level, from CHC members, from organizations and stuff like that. So to pretend that people weren't complaining about it is just, again, another way of trying to create your own reality, right? But the other thing too is that you have an administration now that will define just about anything, including like running a red light, driving without a license, a bunch of things like that into higher criminal charges. It was
Congresswoman Michelle Lujan Grisham's understanding in that meeting today that the way the ICE director Tom Homan, not our homie, described, in his opinion, that executive order basically categorized every undocumented person in this country as illegal, as a criminal. So they have,
and as a guilty criminal. And this is the other thing that makes the difference in terms of this detainer policy, right? So it basically says, and Ray, I don't know about you, but I certainly have known people, because people say, well, if you're a law-abiding citizen, you would never be brought down to a precinct, you would never be spend any time in jail. And anyone who's ever lived in the hood knows that's just bullshit. That's just bullshit. How many times do we know? I mean, you got to call it. That's bullshit, right? Because there are plenty of times where people, good people, first of all, are just like, are misnamed, right? I mean, there are, like, people want to, pretend like they're not no innocent people. Like, there are people who are innocent, right? There are people, who are picked up, and who face a charge of robbery, and that's not them.
Let me tell you,
right? Aside from the fact that some of these things are not, shouldn't even be that criminal defenses, or kind of minor defenses, even when you're in terms of. Let me tell people a quick
story. So, Philadelphia, right? So, one day this is when I was dating my wife. So one day I go back to my apartment with Michelle, and there's a note on the door, like a warrant notice, and apparently some guy with my same name, in Reading, Pennsylvania, which is like 70 miles from where I was living. It wasn't like my even like local community, had been allegedly abusing some dogs. So they had county sheriffs come like 3 counties away to arrest me because they suspected that I was abusing dogs 3 counties from where I live. Now, if I had just happened to be home, I just happened not to be home at the time. If I had been home, they would have arrested me, taken me 3 counties away for mistaken identity for me abusing dogs. First of all, who gets arrested for abusing dogs? I mean, Michael Vick, but I mean the extent that if somebody wants to get you, if law enforcement wants to get you involved in criminal, I mean, there's all kind of creative ways they can do it. I mean, so scary.
Right, but even just a mistake.
Yeah.
Right, even just a mistake.
Obviously, it was.
I remember. I was caught in a speed trap. Right, I was caught in a speed trap here in Miami. Right, true story. I was caught in a speed trap. I was doing 40 and a 35. Right, I was doing 40 and a 35, and I was pulled over. Right, and the guy runs my name, my license, and stuff like that, and he's like, it's a nice day. You seem like a nice guy. I'm not gonna pull you over, but this says that you owe child support. And I was like, I owe child support. I was like, he's like, yeah, you owe child support. You didn't know that? And I was like, I was like, I currently live with my wife, so I find it strange that I owe child support to the only child I know. And I was like, and as far as I know, I only have one child, right? And he's like,
that's a Dominicano response, as far as I know.
No, right? And he's like, no. And the guy's like, and like this classic Miami, right? This classic Miami. The guy's like, and then I break it into Spanish. I talk Spanish to him. He's like, and I was like, no, mira, yo, so like, I'm totally surprised. I'm like, mira, tú me puedes dar más información, porque mira, en realidad, mira, esta cosa, eso me sorprende. And I was like, look, I don't want to be just, based on your good, on your good nature, trying to do that. Can you do me a favor and check it out? Like, at least tell me a little bit more information. The guy comes back and he's like, okay, claro, ma, espérate un segundito, no te preocupes, right? And so he goes back into his thing and like, again, clearly it was like a top line and a computer screen. And he goes back and he's like, yeah, there's a guy, Elbert Garcia, who's wanted for, child support, overstaying child support and things like that. And, and he lives in Ohio, but like he's got relatives in Hialeah, right? Or something to that effect, right? And I'm like, but bro, like, and so so we make a couple calls because I know I got a couple of friends in law enforcement and lawyers and stuff like that. And the person's like, yo, this guy, I'm like 6 feet, almost 6 feet. I'd like to think on a good day, especially if I don't get a haircut, I'm 6 feet, right? And I'm like, and this guy, this other Elbert Garcia is 5'4", Ray, nice. 5'4", y Mexicano, right? 5'4", y Mexicano. Right, and got a middle name like Elbert E. Garcia or something like that, right? So it's not even close, right? Not even close. But imagínate, right? If I had just talked some shit to the cop and he was pissed off at me or whatever, he could have easily have brought me down, right? He could have easily made me make that case at the precinct or in jail. Right. And my point is like I'm a citizen, but if I'm an undocumented person, that effect of even not being guilty of anything brings me into the system. And so when someone
educated, poor, more Spanish speak, even if you didn't understand what was going down, one thing could have led to another very easily,
Right. And so my point is that when someone a leader like Mayor Gimenez calls up and says, oh, we're just dealing with criminals, quote unquote. The problem is that he doesn't understand that acquiescing to this, to this Trump order is opening a Pandora's box that will ensnare a whole bunch of people who don't deserve to be ensnared, right? Who got families, who got jobs, who contribute to our economy, right? And so even in his best intentions, even if he's best intentioned and well intentioned, he's still opening up a Pandora's box that not only takes away in terms of immigration, but then also takes away local control from community people, right? Because that's what you're basically doing. Right. And what I equate it to is like, you know what? At the end of the day, that's not fucking Donald Trump's money. Right. First of all, it's Congress that appropriates it and not him. But let's just say that it's like, freaking, you want to deal with the Federal Department of Transportation and some grant that they have to build some like extra trains in a particular region. At the end of the day, that is not their money. And I would argue with any Republican, especially a Republican, to argue that that is not the government's money. That is taxpayer money. And so at the end of the day, that are the residents of Miami-Dade. That is their money. So a bully who wants to grab your lunch money isn't entitled to that lunch money. It's like someone's coming over here, and basically, a bully like the administration is trying to take the money of Miami-Dade, and the mayor is basically saying, well, as long as you don't take my coat, then you can take my money. And that's what it is. As long as you don't take my sneakers, and not take my coat, then that's fine. Then you can take my money. It ain't yours money to take. It ain't your money to take. Right? And so it's like it's on so many different levels, it's so wrong. Right? And yet, the truth of the matter is that it's gonna be a close vote. It's gonna be a close vote because the mayor now sees it as a legacy kind of thing. The mayor sees it now as his reputation. And the mayor has gotten very, very nasty, as I'm sure in terms of your discussion with Tomas has said. But it's gotten very nasty. And he's gotten up even on radio, on Spanish language radio. Like, someone said, oh, Miami Beach passed a resolution against this. And because the mayor was either ill-informed or not, basically called the caller, who was an activist, a liar. Because he was like, oh, no, it didn't pass. right? When the day before it actually
You know,
passed,
the
right? And
irony
so
of this
again, it's like he was
situation,
trying
the
to,
irony
you
of this
know,
situation is that Mayor Gimenez and that more conservative, older Cuban American demographic, many of which voted for Donald Trump in November, you know, the whole basis of their identity in the United States, and certainly their political identity in the United States, as refugees, right? You know, at least that initial, you know, right, is that they
yeah, they were
left
refugees.
Cuba. They left
That's a
Cuba for this kind
refugee
of
class.
because of this kind of nonsense, and this kind of autocratic bullying, intimidation, silencing, you know, activists, silencing journalists. They're taking a cue from President Trump, and you know, the saddest thing about it is that, you know, we've come so far in Miami, bridging those gaps between the traditional Cuban American community and the other Latino groups. You know, there used to be so many divisions, and there's, you know, but now these wounds and this divisive environment is only going to fester again because basically Jimenez is really sort of pitted, you know, the quote unquote good immigrants with the bad immigrants, and it's just it's very ugly. And you're listening to Elbert Garcia, my compadre and a political analyst and activist, you know, from NY to 305, everywhere in between, and you're listening.
Sounds like a good
Absolutely,
album.
and with a Don Omar collabo,
No. Pero está
woo,
feo.
woo.
Ray, está feo. Porque, the thing is, at the end of the day, if the mayor had wanted to say, if the mayor just wanted to say, look, we did it because of the money, and like it's too great of a risk, it's too great of a chance. The truth is, the ACLU, the Southern Poverty Law, and a bunch of legal experts said, look, you didn't have to make that decision. First of all, we believe that this executive order is unconstitutional, but no one is actually saying you have to do it. And if he had stuck to that and just stuck to like the financial argument, people still would be pissed, but people could at least say, okay, you know what, you're trying to do right by the county. We understand. Yeah, you know what? Maybe you just got shook because
Yeah,
he's shook.
yeah, he
Because
got
that's what
shook.
it
Yeah,
is.
he got
He's
shook. Yeah,
shook, right? And so the problem is, when people calling him a scaredy cat, that's when like that whole Latino machismo
totally,
kind of thing just kind of
totally,
reared
yeah,
its ugly head. And now ese tipo
totally,
está,
yeah,
tú sabes,
totally.
está loco, right? Because because basically, you know what? People are calling him a punk, right? Because that's what it is. In all intents and purposes, he's a punk, right? Because he won't stand up. He'd rather stand up and try to secure Trump's money, but he won't try to defend the money
So,
of taxpayers,
mhm.
right? And the saddest thing is that he could have the courts on his side, he could have a whole bunch of people on his side, and he could easily just say, you know what, I'm not gonna make a decision until the courts decide, right? Even if he just wanted to be like, look, I'm gonna let the
Yeah,
courts decide, right?
a
I'm gonna
lot
let the
going on. Yeah,
Constitution
that's
decide,
going to take
right?
time to
But
play out.
no, he
No
didn't
doubt,
want to
no
do it,
doubt. No doubt. And again, you're listening to Elbert
but
Garcia and Ray Collazo breaking it down, this crazy week of politics, coast to coast. I'm going to give Elbert a second to think about his shout outs because I'll have a few here real quick. I want to start in rapid fire. First of all, much respect to our friends, our familia, particularly in the business world today, that our day without an immigrant actions, which involve many business owners and people that work in various industries taking a day off from work as a show of force to show the economic and social and community impact of workers, regardless of their citizenship, of their legal status in this country. Again, the quote unquote Italian market in South Philly was shut down today because without Mexicans and Southeast Asians, you don't have an Italian market anymore in South Philly. So much respect to our Philadelphia activists, and Jose Andres, the famous chef, of course, led the D.C. effort, coast to coast, people having their voice heard. And the thing I want to challenge, and we're going to talk about this on future episodes, Albert, is, our immigrant workers, our immigrant leaders, particularly our undocumented leaders, like that woman in Denver that's now in a church, and coast to coast, they keep putting themselves on the line. And while I appreciate them and I love them and I admire them for doing it, the dreamers, on and on, the rest of us gotta get on the front lines here, and we gotta do our part,
no, we gotta
and we're
step
gonna.
up.
Mhm.
We gotta. No, I was gonna say, like, we gotta step up, but the other truth of the matter is this too, Ray. And I think this is the one thing that is, I think, our organizations and our active organizations, there's gonna be I don't want to say tension, but there certainly is gonna be a learning process and growth process, right? because ultimately, and you and I know this, like people people enter engagement first at the level that they're comfortable with, right? And for some people, that might be going to a protest, but for some people that might not be. Some people, might feel comfortable going to lobby their elected official, or even call their elected official. And for some people that, that's actually not the comfort level in, right? And so I think part of it is also trying to like work hard and figure out what's the best way to do it. I think the one thing that I will have said that, having seen, as I mentioned before this week, a bunch of folks here in Miami to try to call attention to both what was going on nationally and also in terms of what was going on locally here, began a 5-day fast. And our fast is different than a hunger strike. A hunger strike, kind of you begin and you really don't end it until you achieve your goal, right? A fast is a set time and day where you begin and you end it. And you really it's kind of a, as Steve Jobs would probably be fond of, it's kind of an end-to-end kind of, action in that kind of way, right? But they, here, nonetheless, here are folks who, putting their health on the line to try to put attention. And that has gotten a lot of people's eyes opened, right? And in ways that you don't, that yes, it's gotten media coverage, but the conversations that has had, and they themselves have had as they've traveled across the city and have been outside government center in a couple public places, is really interesting, because they've kind of posed this idea of like, well, what's our moral responsibility? Like, what are you doing, right? What are you willing to do, and how are you willing to kind of do it? And that's really kind of opened up people's, people have been, surprisingly for me, in a place like Miami where people sometimes just kind of circle the wagons and just for their own self-protection and self-care say, hey, if it doesn't affect me, if I can still enjoy the sunshine, then it's cool. And people have really kind of begun to think about it, and especially kind of our faith leaders, they've begun to ask their other colleagues and say, what can we do, right? I mean, we are people, men and women of the cloth. Are we doing all that we can? Are we opening up, our churches, and not just necessarily for protests and things like that, but like, are we opening it up for citizenship classes? Are we serving our people? Are we safeguarding their fears? Are we speaking to their fears? Are we, helping parents who might be struggling to find a job, feel good about taking care of their kids or something, right? So it's caused this kind of conversation about like, well, how do we kind of get through this? And I think that's something that, if you want to call like the larger movement, is going to have to figure out an answer, right? Because we're going to have to do things over these next 4 years that are different, right? Not just to achieve change, but to also just take care of people, right? And that's going to be, and that's going to bring in different people. That's going to bring in people perhaps who have different appetites for this kind of stuff, but their skills are still needed, right? And their consciousness, right? That we have to be invested in the growth of the consciousness of our people. And that means, like sometimes having difficult conversations and sometimes not losing hope and faith that people will actually get there. And that's, that's not an easy thing to do, especially if you're talking about for some of our activists who've been doing this for years, right? And so that's going to be an interesting real kind of self challenge that we're going to have to also face as a community.
We're going to be having more guests on the show to talk about different ways people can contribute, whether it's people that are potentially interested in organizing in more of a social media element, and people that are experts in that, people that are experts in just giving back to the community through social services, through charity, through philanthropy, through political giving. I mean, if you don't got time, you can always write a check. There's plenty to do, and plenty of entities and plenty of organizations and movements to support. And also I'm going to be bringing on a Dominicana, Elbert Candy Calderon, who's going to help us with getting us grounded. How do the activists that are going crazy with all this political stuff, how do we keep ourselves healthy and keep ourselves sane, balanced, focused, and because this is a lot of high anxiety time, and Candy's going to help us kind of flesh that out. A couple of quick shout-outs. The 10 members, LB, I don't know if you saw this, 10 members of the President's Advisory Commission on Asian American and Pacific Islanders resigned. They said, we ain't welcomed up in here, y'all. So much respect to our Asian American brothers and sisters. There was a little chatter on Facebook this evening say, will the Latinos on the advisory commission follow suit? That'll be interesting to watch. And, of course, our dear friend from New York City, Grace Bonilla, I don't know if you saw this, was just announced this afternoon. She's going to join the Mayor de Blasio administration as the Administrator of Human Resources. A little birdie had mentioned that possibility to me during the holidays, but and I'm so glad for Grace, a great leader for us. Was running the Committee of Hispanic Children and Families. Collaborated a lot with her with that organization, and one of our Ecuadorian American leaders holding it down. So great to hear from Grace, and we'd love to have her on the show once she gets settled in with the de Blasio administration. Any other shout-outs, anything else you wanted to mention, Elbert, on this leaks are the only thing that's real episode of Ray's Talk Show?
Well, Ray, I just wanted to shout out to certainly two folks in terms on here. I mean, not enough can be said about the female leadership here, and certainly across the nation, but certainly in the state of Florida when it comes to these issues. I mean, I think, it just, our women are leading. Our mothers, our sisters, our daughters, they are leading, and they never get enough credit for it. And they are challenging not only the system, but they're also challenging, male privilege, in terms of how to do things. And the way folks are treated, whether it's in meetings, whether it's in lobbying meetings, or in terms of other things like that, they're not only holding their own, but they're fighting back, and they're fighting back in the right way and the way that needs to happen. And so I think definitely a lot of shout out to those women who are doing things both named and unnamed to kind of push progress forward. I think that's definitely the first kind of general shout out. And that includes people like, Ruth Moreno, Maria Rodriguez, in terms of folks, in terms of there, and people that you might not get, always seen, like, my fellow communicators, Paola Florida at Flake, or Elizabeth Fernandez with SEIU, Natalia Jaramillo, who also is in the union movement as well as leading her own set of folks, Latina Comunica, Maria Bilbao, who is an extremely great press and PR person who really has kind of built a career after starting out as a domestic worker, right? And now kind of doing that and dealing with the press and doing that. These are ladies who provide hope and inspiration.
Absolutely. And next week, I didn't even get to it. My Hill visits and some of my inside scoop that I got from our members of Congress. We'll get into that next week on the show, Albert. But let people know where they can find you on social media.
Oh my God, that's true. Yeah. You can find me. You can find me at Elbert Garcia FL, or you can also find me at and that's usually where my political stuff usually kind of happens there. That's kind of based around there. But you can also find me at LB Writing. That's also it's a little more kind of deeper kind of discussions on social media. I'm always on Facebook, and usually I'm behind the story. So I'm kind of pitching and doing that. Gonna also give out a shout out to my folks over at Law at the Margins, lawatthemargins.com. Chamtoli Huck is really leading a great thing. We've started an actual faith justice series that's being kind of curated by Victor Nato, who heads the UCLA Worker Center, and kind of really talking about discussions on kind of the intersection of faith and justice. And I saw that this week in Miami as these fasters came in, and again, emboldened by those folks, the South Florida Interfaith Network there, led by Jeanette Smith, getting 40 religious figures, including the Archdeacon of the Episcopalian Church here, and Catholic Charities over here, to kind of stand up and say, no, Mayor Gimenez, you and the commissioner, regardless of what the executive order says, you need to find a way to protect immigrant families regardless of status. And that's an important thing. Even if Mayor Gimenez gets his way, on the commission, maybe church might be a little more difficult for him this Sunday. So I'll take that, I'll take that in the short term, any day of the week.
And the last shout out is something that always puts a smile on me and Albert's face, is that pitchers and catchers have reported. Mets, Phils, and the rest of the bunch. I was just on social media. One of our I don't know how I ended up being friends with all these Met fans. Edward Ayala, one of our great Mets bloggers, and friends. He's we were talking. Absolutely. Well, he's gonna come see a Phillies Mets game this summer in Philadelphia. We're gonna hang out there, and hopefully you can join us, Elbert, either here or in South Florida or New York. But anyway, so yeah, and we're as a Phillies fan, I take great pleasure in nagging, teasing, hating, being jealous at times of Met Nation. So, but you know, our championship was. Did take place more recently, so it's always a lot of fun to talk about it. But you guys have a good squad. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. Hopefully, hey,
they can stay healthy.
We have the World Baseball Classic coming up. There'll be a lot going on, but the baseball's going to heat up very soon.
Mira, well, don't sleep. I don't have an official. I don't want to pull a Kelly Conway, right? But the fact of the matter is that the World Baseball Classic. Here in Miami, I tell you what, even if Loria sells the Marlin, the Marlins Park is a great park to watch baseball, and the fact that we get to see our national squads here in Miami.
What I'm most intrigued about that first round down there is will the Colombianos represent for the baseball? That's going to be very interesting. If you get a good Colombian crowd. Down there in Miami for that team, which got some pitching. Teheran, Quintana, they got the catching prospect. They don't have a bad squad.
I'm just saying, didn't they stick the Puerto Rican squad in Mexico? Didn't they stick the Puerto Rican squad in Mexico?
Round,
like,
Puerto
what's
Rico's
the deal
playing
with that,
Mexico,
I'm like,
Italy, and Venezuela. It is I said, what is it? Society of.
Are you trying? Is this the idea of like putting UCLA in the East bracket so they can have an easier way to get out, get into the? Because I think that's Puerto Rico's got to be favored, no?
I mean, Venezuela, I would imagine it's favored. I mean, they've been truthfully chokers.
Well, I'm just saying Puerto Rico just came from the
Puerto Ricans have stepped it up, and we have the best chemistry of any roster. It's clear. We always overachieve in this tournament.
And I'm saying you guys are coming off second. You guys are coming off the Caribbean World Series,
the World Baseball Classic. You guys have a very you guys won, but you have clearly the more talented roster. But no, but it's funny because I'm like, these are all the groups that want to be Puerto Ricans. I mean, what is this tournament?
Ray, it's all about hot streaks. The Puerto Rican team is hot. I was the first to admit that.
We're going to have the young trio, Lindor, Baez, and Correa, manning the infield. Yadi will steer our pitching staff. I feel very good about our roster. Alex Correa. But yeah, no, it's Mike, my brother, Michael Collazo, will be representing. He's attending the games in San Diego in the second round. So he's hoping that Puerto Rico gets to the first round. But we got time to talk about that. World Baseball Classic, the baseball's heating up. It's a lot of fun. Hopefully Joel Embiid will get back on the court, and Carmelo and Charles Oakley will get free Charles Oakley here. That's a whole other conversation. We'll get Jorge Martinez on next week. Check out Ray's Talk Show at Ray'sPodcast.com, as well as Ray's Podcast on iTunes, anywhere you can download a podcast, and keep the conversation going at Ray's Podcast on Twitter. Thank you all so much. Resist, y'all, as Tribe Called Quest said on the Grammy Sunday. Resist, 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 resist.